So welcome, Martha Stark, to Secrets of the Masters. It is a privilege to have you here today.
It is a pleasure and a privilege for me to be here, Rick. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And we are connected and close from Boston, Massachusetts, where you are a psychoanalyst and a psychiatrist whose work I admire so much. And I will say a little bit more about that in a moment. But if you can give us a quick synopsis about you and your work, that would be fantastic.
Oh, I would love to do that. It's near and dear to my heart.
It is.
When I was in college, I majored in mathematics, but it was very pure mathematics, abstract. And I sort of loved the challenge of that with my mind, but it didn't involve my heart. And so I was going to be a mathematician. That's sort of what people thought I was going to do. And I did still major in mathematics, but at some point realized what I really wanted to do was to be able to use my mind and my heart. And so it is that in my last year at Harvard, I became pre-med and then went on to medical school at Harvard Medical School. Didn't really highlight that I was going to be a psychiatrist because, well, back in those days, psychiatrists were sort of thought of as being at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of MDs. So I just said, TBD, to be determined what I would decide ultimately to specialize in.
Yeah.
So anyway, so did Harvard Medical School. There were way back, there were 160 people in my class. 150 of them were men.
I was just going to ask about this.
10 of them were women, and 4 of us were named Martha. It was a popular name. So anyway, so then I went on. So by then I was sort of wedded to Cambridge in the Boston area, and I went on to get my psychoanalytic training.
How did you decide to do that? And
well,
what year was
again,
this?
the psychoanalytic worked perfectly because the psycho piece of it, the people person, I kind of had gotten that from my mom. My mom was, may she rest in peace, but a very sort of people-oriented person who just loved chatting with people, and all my friends, would share their life stories with her. And not that I necessarily was busy sharing my life story with her, but anyway, my friends were. And so she was a people person, and I got my pleasure in connecting with people from my mom. So that's the psycho in psychoanalytic. The analytic piece is my dad. And yes, he was a mathematician. And there you go. And I had a very special connection with him. And so the analytic piece, psychoanalytic, I get to use heart and head. And it seemed very satisfying. And then I got to do, and I guess I'll explain a little bit more my professional trajectory. But what has been important to me has been both the clinical work that I do, and my writing and my teaching, the theoretical work that I do. So basically, and now it's going to become very clear how old I am, but there's been a decade for each of my 5 models. So do the math, 5 decade. There you go. And so ultimately, though only more recently did I decide that the name of my approach to the therapeutic action of psychodynamic psychoanalytic psychotherapy, whether it's short-term, intensive, or longer-term, in-depth, or crisis intervention, or medication management, basically, it's about the process between patient and therapist, and the way in which the patient evolves from point A, defense, to point B, adaptation, from defensive reaction to adaptive response, from need, defensive need, to adaptive capacity, from need to capacity, in essence, from id to ego. There's the classical that sort of popped out there, classical psychoanalytic. So in essence, that the healing process involves healing cycles. And this is what I write about. This is what my psychodynamic synergy paradigm with its 5 models is all about. The healing process being a story about patient and therapist working together to help the patient evolve through healing cycles, iterative cycles of disruption in response to challenge, and then reconstitution or repair in reaction to or response to support. And by tapping into the inherent, intrinsic, innate capacity of the patient to self-correct in the face of challenge.
Amazing.
So it'll be healing cycles of disruption and repair in reaction/response to the optimal stress provided by the therapist of just the right mix between challenge, which creates the impetus for disruption of a status quo that's dysfunctional, and then opportunity for recovery or repair at a higher level of integration, balance, and harmony. So these healing cycles of disruption, repair at ever higher levels, ideally, of balance, harmony, and adaptive capacity from defense to adaptation.
Do you mind if I interrupt you?
Please do. Please do.
I want to spend a little more time going over these models because I've studied them with you.
Yes,
and they're so profound. And one of the reasons why I worked so hard to get you here today is because you are a psychoanalyst with the biggest heart of anybody I know. And when you when you present your material, you break it down so beautifully and compellingly that it makes people want to be with you more. And it's showing today. Oh my God, you're blushing. I'm so sorry.
I'm blushing through my makeup.
You are. It's showing. And I just wanted to speak about when I first met you. So have a little bit of the fun side and the intimate side.
Oh, please.
And then we'll go back to the work model.
Oh, yes.
So years ago, which I don't even know if I told you this, I went with a colleague of mine from Cape Cod to hear a woman who was giving a day-long conference in Boston, and her name was Martha Stark. And I knew the name Martha Stark and pictured someone kind of bigger than life. And I forgot where the conference was, but there were hundreds of people there. And there you were giving a compelling conference, much like you are giving today in this short period of time. And it was so incredible to see a psychoanalyst in Boston who had a personality and a heart as big as yours. And it just inspired me to appreciate psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic work in a different way, because you gave yourself and you encouraged me, at least, if not other people, to do the same just through being yourself. So I just wanted to say that.
Oh, Rick. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
That means the world to me. Thank you. And you know that I think the world of you.
I do know that.
And you have taught me so much over the course of the years. And it has been so much fun. You and I, our connection, our quantum entanglement. We'll get to that in Model 5. Anyway, just the connection that we have and how you enable me to be the best that I am.
Oh, thank you.
Which is such a gift.
Yeah.
That get the best and the most of who I am. It's happening now with us here now. And in our times that we've met, it happens every single time. Isn't that wonderful? The magic of
wonderful. And I suppose I'm here today because of you indirectly. And
yes.
Speaking of math, I started consulting with you in my practice around managing money.
Yes,
and
that's true.
You're really good with money, and I didn't realize that you had a math background.
Yes.
And the other interesting thing is that you and I have many connections in the Boston community from various people. So after seeing you that one time and consulting with you decades later, everyone, meaning many of my friends, talked about Martha Stark. So here we are, full circle. Yeah.
Thank you, dear Rick.
Yes.
Thank you.
So what people are seeing is the Martha Stark that I know
Oh,
and the Martha Stark, the people that choose to work with you on any number of levels, whether it be
oh.
professionally, supervisory. We all get to see the heart that you bring in to your work. So,
Oh, boy, am I glad I agreed to do this.
me too.
Thank you.
The
Thank you.
other thing I wanted to say about your newest model, and you can go back to that,
You
incorporating
will
all
hear
your
how
models,
it came to be. Yes.
and that I don't know of anybody who weaves in psychoanalytic work as deeply and purposefully as you do, along with what I call a mindful perspective and an awareness
And
that goes
heartfelt,
and
heartfelt,
heartfelt.
and mindful and
And
heartfelt.
and I think you've done an incredible job of weaving this all together, whereas many other people are busy doing one or the other, whereas you bring it together. So I wanted to say that for people.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Well, one of the greatest compliments I get is that when I present,
Yeah.
people will be listening intently and they'll say, I really enjoyed it. I really did. But on some level, I guess I'd already kind of known that. I just hadn't necessarily had the words to express it.
Mm.
And for me, that's a great compliment. On some level, I'm an integrative thinker.
Yeah.
And it's not that I'm necessarily creating something totally new, but a slightly uh, different way to sort of conceptualize the therapeutic process.
Yeah.
So it was only more recently, as I'd mentioned, that I came up with the idea that my 5 models or modes could actually be their essence captured under the umbrella of my psychodynamic synergy paradigm. And I love the word synergy. I also, at some point, had figured out the name for, all of us kind of work to try to figure out the name of our company or our group. And I finally had figured out the following: Synergy Med, that's one word with 2 initial caps, Synergy Med for mind, body, health, 3 initial caps, MBH, one word. And then after the colon, integrating traditional and non-traditional solutions.
Mm.
And I was lucky enough to discover that I could get a domain name of synergymed.com was already taken by somebody. They buy it and then they want you to pay $1,000 to get that
Or
domain name.
20,000. Yeah.
Or 20,000. So I'm sort of thinking, oh no. But then my dear sweet Gunnar, who's my life partner of 40 years, he said, well, let's look at other possible extensions. And I'm thinking, no, I can't get .com. Oh no. So we look and we see that solutions is an extension.
Ah.
So actually, the subtitle had been integrating traditional and non-traditional strategies, because I think strategies is a cool word. But when I saw that solutions was an extension, I changed it to, I adapted to that. Instead of being defending, I adapted and thought integrating traditional and non-traditional solutions. And I want to say one more word about integrating, and then I'm going to do my 5 modes.
Okay.
There are 2 ways we use the word integrating. I had sort of tended to think that integration meant you have A, you have B, and if you integrate them, that means you have AB, the synergy of the best of both. That's fine. That's one way to look at it. Love it. But actually, Dick Schwartz, as in Internal Family Systems, brilliant founder, has another way of looking at it. And I like that way also. He thinks of it as, and I hope I'm doing justice by his way of conceptualizing it, you have A, you have B, and or parts, but if you integrate them, it facilitates the connection between them, as in left side of the brain, right side of the brain, and the fibrous band of connective tissue, the corpus callosum. So you facilitate the flow of information and energy between the two sides such that you can optimize what each brings to the table. The analytic wisdom of the left brain and the emotional wisdom harbored in the body, which gets us finally around to my passion for mind body. I was certainly trained more with respect to the mind and the heart. And in the last 20 years or so, and you'll hear about this in a moment when we get to my Model 5, I've become more attuned to the complex interdependence between mind and body, truly in the form of the mind-body matrix and the flow of information and energy throughout the whole extracellular matrix, the divine matrix. And I give numbers of talks now at integrative medicine conferences, and where they're like listening to the words of a psychoanalyst and psychiatrist and thinking like, wow, that's really cool. So I have the pleasure of sort of presenting to them as well in these last 20 years, say. So mind, body, busy, maybe.
As you describe this, can you also weave in what in the trajectory of your own life, whether it be personal or professional or both, led you to go down the path in the direction of mind body?
Well, I've always been interested in optimal challenge, optimal stress.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, let me digress for one moment, please. One of the concepts that I guess I'm known for is relentless hope, the refusal to grieve.
Yes.
And in essence, not all hope is good. Mature hope is, realistic hope is, but relentless hope, whereby you refuse to confront and grieve the reality of the object of your desires, limitation, separateness, and immutability, and you keep hoping against hope that maybe someday, somehow, some way, the object will be forthcoming. That's relentless hope, not so good. By the same token, I came to realize that stress, optimal stress, which I referenced earlier, not all stress is bad. So not all hope is good, relentless hope, and not all stress is bad, optimal stress, or what Hans Selye would have called eustress, EU stress. And so those two pillars, relentless hope and optimal stress, form an important part of my perspective about the mind body. All right, so let me then, you'll understand a little more clearly as I talk about my decades of development, about how the body came to be integrated. Other than that, with the optimal, I sort of began to feel that the 4 modes of therapeutic action didn't quite do justice by the very powerful and intricate and quantum relationship between the mind and the body. And so I just had to, for the sake of integrity and completeness, I just had to add my 5th
I
model.
love this. Love that about you.
And so it was an organic something. And meanwhile, I've always been somebody, because I guess my parents were this way, I've always had very healthy lifestyle choices and tried to limit toxic environmental exposures. And I've been blessed with constitutional good health.
Good.
And both of my parents died in their late 90s. So I've been very blessed in that way. All right. So Model 1. Okay. And interestingly, the name of my first book, Modes of Therapeutic Action, it was the first 3 models: enhancement of knowledge, classical psychoanalytic, provision of experience, the self-psychology and other deficit models, and engagement in relationship, the intersubjective perspective of contemporary relational theory. The title was to be Models of Therapeutic Action. But the woman who sort of typeset it all, I think unconsciously, she didn't like the L on models. So she got rid of the L and made it modes.
That's how it happened.
And I so liked that.
Wow.
And
like the domain
Judith,
name.
she should not rest in peace. She's still living, but she's kind of old, but whatever. So I decided modes of therapeutic action, but it's models, but modes that speak to modes of healing, whereby the patient, we work with them to evolve them from defense to adaptation, from cursing the darkness to lighting a candle. And parenthetically, when I'm being a little bit more defensive or reactive than adaptive or responsive, my dear sweet Gunnar will say, remember, instead of cursing the darkness, maybe you need to be lighting a candle.
And how does it feel when he says that?
Thank you, my dear sweet Gunnar. Yes, right. Okay, touche. All right. So in the 70s, when I was beginning my psychoanalytic training, I was being taught classical psychoanalytic theory, the interpretive perspective of classical psychoanalytic theory. In the 80s, I'm going to do a quick something and then come back a little bit more. In the 80s, I was exposed to self-psychology and other deficit models like Michael Balint's, the area of the basic fault. So this is the corrective provision perspective of self-psychology. That was the 80s. Interestingly, so model 1 is about structural or neurotic or intrapsychic conflict. So structural conflict. And model 2 is about structural deficit. Yes. Now you'll see I love symmetry, and we're gonna see it's gonna work well here. All right. So model 2 self-psychology and other deficit models. So the corrective provision or deficiency compensation perspective of model 2. Model 3 is the intersubjective perspective of contemporary relational theory. And that was in the 90s when I was exposed to some really cool people, Stephen Mitchell and Owen Rennick and Darlene Ehrenberg and Jay Greenberg. And now that model became my relational conflict.
Yeah.
So structural conflict, structural deficit, relational conflict. But if one thinks mathematically, as my dear friend, Dr. Larry Hedges did, who was on my case about this for many years, he knew my material so well, bless him, that he knew something was missing. And he was on my case for many years. He said, well, if you got structural conflict and you got structural deficit and you got relational conflict, then you need a fourth model that would be a story about relational deficit. And so I'll share it very briefly. So model 4 then became, so whereas model 1 is a story. Okay, so again, symmetry is relevant here. So model 1, again, they're all about defense to adaptation by way of healing cycles of disruption and repair. In model 1, classical psychoanalytic, the patient evolves from resistance to insight or awareness. But there's something relevant here. The defense starts with the letter R, resistance. The adaptation, it could have been insight, but I want it to be awareness because that starts with the letter A, and you'll see why in a moment, why that's so relevant, although you already know. But anyway, in model 2, it's a story about, as we'd said, relentless hope goes into my model 2, where the patient with the deficit, and which then prompts them to look to the outside for environmental provision, to provide in those ways that were not consistently and reliably provided early on, thus the structural deficit or the absence of good, impaired capacity. And so it is that one is relentlessly hopeful, hoping that someday, somehow, some way, the object will be forthcoming in the way that the parent could have, should have been reliably and consistently early on, but wasn't. So in model 2, the therapeutic action involves helping the patient evolve by way of grieving. Model 1 is about interpretation, more heady. Model 2, more heart, by way of grieving from relentless pursuit of the unattainable to sober, mature acceptance. Whew. Okay, got the A letter in there. Okay, we're good. So looking good. All right, model 3, the 90s, the contemporary intersubjective perspective. And now instead of, as in model 2, absence of good in terms of early on parental stressors, instead of absence of good, traumatic stressors, instead of an internal record of absence of good, model 2, now it's presence of bad. So whereas model 2 is about deprivation and neglect, parental or early on important significant infantile figures, model 3 is about presence of bad, trauma and abuse. And the internal record of that will be a dysfunctional relational dynamic, but internal bad objects, presence of bad, charged, toxic gunks, that will then be continuously reenacted compulsively and unwittingly on the stage of the person's life.
Yeah.
And so now we have the defense will be what we could say repetition compulsion, or repetition or reenactment, which suggests more the actual action of playing it out on the stage of one's life and in the treatment. So the defense, model 1, resistance; model 2, relentless hope, relentless pursuit of the unattainable; model 3, reenactment of unmastered early on relational traumas. So reenactment, playing it out often by way of projective identification, which is sort of the buzzword here, projective identification, on the stage of the treatment. And the goal will be ultimately, and it's the goal for both the patient, but ultimately also the therapist, who needs to hold herself accountable for the part she's playing in what becomes a mutual enactment by virtue of it being a projective identification, the patient creating a force field whereby she draws the therapist into participating with her in what then becomes a mutual enactment. And it's for the therapist to be able to provide containment, yes, but in particular to be able to hold herself accountable for the part she has played in the mutual enactment, that has created, in Paul Russell's words, a crunch situation. So it is ultimately by way of the therapist's participation as a container and her capacity to hold herself accountable that the patient then will evolve from reenactment to accountability. There's the A. You were going to say something.
I have a question for you,
Yes, please.
even though I hate to interrupt the
That's
flow,
okay.
which is a lot of new modes of psychotherapy don't take any of this into account. And how do you feel about that? And how do you handle that?
Yeah. I mean, let me get back to that. That's an important question. And parenthetically, these more psychodynamically informed modes don't take into consideration some of what model 5 and the more present to future oriented models take into consideration. And we're going to see that models 1 to 4 are more about the relationship between the toxicity of the past and the present, and how the present is the essence of the present is imbued with the toxicity of the past. And we come to understand models 1 to 4. Model 5 is sort of like, well, now a certain other kind of accountability for taking ownership of your need to change. So what are you going to do now that's going to be different in terms of how you position yourself in your life? So good point about accountability, because it plays a different role in the different models on some level. But in model 3, then, from reenactment, compulsive and unwitting, I love the word unwitting, meaning sort of unconscious, to accountability. So that's relational conflict, which is Stephen Mitchell's term. And I like that. So I lifted that and put that here, relational conflict. All right. So model 4, an interesting story about how that came to be that I'd love to share with you. And this, again, harkens back to my dear friend, Dr. Larry Hedges, who did me the honor of knowing my material well enough and teaching it, I guess, to his people, that he knew something was missing. And, when you've had my modes of therapeutic action, 1994 it was published. It was book of the year by my publisher, Jason Aronson, which was delightful. But it's my 3 modes. And now we're getting into the decade from 2000 to 2010. And I've never known the name of that, the out decade, whatever that decade is. So you say 70s, 80s, 90s for models 1, 2, 3. Model 4 is 2000 to 2010, that there decade. So Larry, I'd given a conference, a six-hour long conference out there in LA. And Larry's driving me to the airport. And he said, Martha, I'm going to put my foot down. You got to add model 4. I mean, I just want to be very clear. And I'm saying, Larry, I'm going to put my foot down, sort of like, no, I'm sort of established. My models 1, 2, and 3, it's all good. So anyway, I said, well, listen, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. The defense has to start with the letter R. If I'm going to add a fourth model, the defense has to start with the letter R. The adaptation has to start with the letter A. But even more than that, the optimal stressor, because in all of these models, and I'll review in a second, in all of these models, the optimal stressor starts with the letter D. And I mean, I knew I was set because I knew we weren't going to, it's only half an hour from where we were to LAX. All right. So model 1, the optimal stressor, which is really the cutting edge of the therapeutic work. Again, it's interpretation, but the cutting edge is dissonance, cognitive dissonance. So dissonance is the second word, D. That's okay. Cognitive dissonance between gain and pain for another time. Model 2, self-psychology and all that, we know about optimal disillusionment and grieving.
Yeah.
All right. And I'm going to call that affective disillusionment because model 2 is about the heart. So cognitive dissonance, affective disillusionment.
Mhm.
And model 3, so model 1, cognitive, model 2, affective, model 3, about the other, the self and the other, the intersubjective relationship between two authentic subjects. So what is the optimal stressor, the sort of cutting edge of the therapeutic action?
Mhm.
Well, it's going to be, again, remember, projective identification and Darlene Ehrenberg's lovely term, intimate edge. And then I add negotiating at the intimate edge,
Yeah.
the mutual entanglements and mutual enactments that unfold. So now the optimal stressor will be detoxification
Mhm.
of the patient's toxicity or pathogenic interjects that were the presence of bad, the internal record of the presence of bad because of trauma and abuse. So the internal charged toxic boluses of negativity and toxicity. So it's detoxification.
Wow.
And since it's a relational perspective, it's relational detoxification. So the optimal stressors, cognitive dissonance, optimal disillusionment, and relational detoxification. So I say to Larry, okay, so the defense, so R. Well, that one was, okay, all right, so we got several there. Okay, I'll grant you, Larry, okay, several. Relentless despair, relational retreat.
Mhm.
Relational retreat, I think, is the one I go with the most. Relational retreat and relentless despair. And the name of the book, by the way, that came out of Model 4, I'm jumping ahead a little bit though, is A Heart Shattered, The Private Self, and a Life Unlived, I like colons. An existential humanistic approach to relentless despair. Okay, so model 4, retreat, psychic retreat, relational absence, relentless despair. Okay. All right, so now we need to get, so Larry and I are, getting to LAX.
Pulling
Now
up to
we
the
need,
curb.
say what?
I said pulling up to the curb.
Yeah, just about. Now we
Yeah.
need to get to the adaptation.
Yeah.
This word I've never loved totally, but I said to him, okay, Larry, I'm okay with this one because I knew I was going to get him on the optimal stressor. The adaptation is accessibility,
Mhm.
availability,
Right.
or we could even later, I came to realize, aliveness
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
authentic presence.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, all right. Now the optimal stressor. Well, this one, okay. This one we really struggled with. So we're actually at the curbside at LAX, and I'm basically going to be missing my plane, which is just fine with Larry because he is determined. So we're thinking. So what's the cutting edge of the therapeutic action? And again, these are patients I've dealt with, patients he's dealt with. And so I worked with them. How would I describe it? So I've clinically experienced all this stuff with people. And it was out of that theory arose, as opposed to I have theory and I sort of make it fit.
Right. Yeah.
Of course, I'm supposed to say that because it'd be bad to say it the other way, right? It wouldn't make me look too good. All right. So anyway, so clinically, all right. And I realized, in essence, that the therapeutic action with these patients who have shattered hearts and a private self versus the false self they present to the world, the public
Yeah.
self, thinking Winnicott here,
Mhm.
and relentless despair, where they just feel alienated and separated from the world, is they need to be able someday to try again with letting someone else really matter.
Wow.
Their heart is shattered, and they've shut down and closed off defensively the retreat, the relational absence. They present okay to the world, quite possibly, but right, private self, true self hidden. So then I thought about Masood Khan, who talks about helping the patient overcome their dread of surrender to resourceless dependence. Well, actually, and even as I say this, oh my God, I really mean this. I could have gone, oh my God. Oh my God. All right. The word was dependence is what I've written about, but dread could work. It's existential humanistic. Dread could work just as well.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I really mean that. I told you, Rick, when you and I get together, you evolve me to, oh my God. All right. Well, I thought it was dependent. So later, i.e. today, April 20 something, I discovered
April 26th at 10:30 a.m.
All right. So dependence. So anyway, at that point, so Larry and I, just as I'm getting out of the car, I said dependence. And then he said, because we were thinking Winnicott, who talks about the maturational progression from absolute dependence to relative dependence towards autonomy. Mm-hmm. And so absolute dependence, help the patient overcome their dread of surrender to absolute dependence or resourceless dependence upon another, such that there can be some moments of joyful, heartfelt connection and meeting that will give purpose and direction and meaning to a life that would otherwise have remained despairing and desolate and impoverished and alone. So important that there be a very special place for the patient who is half in and half out. A part of them, desperate to be seen, known, understood, but another part of them terrified of being found. So the conflict for them there is just even being in the relationship. All right. So
I just want to say I'm feeling a little bit of that now, not the
because of COVID
bad part, but the energetic part of being with you. And that is what you give, but it's also what your models provide. So
thank you. Yeah. Thank you. So Larry and I said, okay, Larry, all right, God damn it. Okay. So we have structural conflict, structural deficit, relational conflict, and relational deficit. I'm okay with this. Sorry, hair in my face. All right. So I got home. And so I said, okay, so from relational retreat, relational absence, relentless despair to aliveness, awake, authentic presence.
It must have been some plane ride for you. I can picture you.
It was I'm like, just like, oh my God, oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And so dependence, and we'll make it, I thought, okay, we'll make it absolute dependence because of Winnicott. But, I don't like the word absolute, because I like the word, okay, but it doesn't work as well in my models, because we had cognitive dissonance, we have affective disillusionment, we have relational detoxification. And this is supposed to be an existential humanistic approach. And like absolute, that didn't feel quite right. So then I thought, and thank God for the internet, and thank God you can look up everything. If you don't know anything, you're just like busy looking it up. And I thought, I think I want to call it existential dependence. So I thought, well, I wonder, whatever. So I go and you quote existential dependence, end quote. Lo and behold, it is a concept that already exists that is exactly what we're talking about in Model 4. Wow. It's where you depend upon another for your very existence, your very identity.
Wow.
Existential dependence, which is what they're in such conflict about, being able to allow themselves to have.
Yeah.
All right. So there we go. So we got that. Structural conflict, structural deficit, relational conflict, relational deficit. And that was good. All right. then a number of years ago, well, meanwhile, I'd been, kind of getting around and going to different conferences, doing the integrative medicine circuit and so on, getting training with Al Pesso, and with my dear friend Pat Ogden. And Peter Levine. I had the pleasure of, because he's so close to Pat Ogden, pleasure of spending time with Peter Levine and the mind body stuff and these approaches that instead of being longer term, more characterological, in-depth, psychoanalytic, psychodynamic, which are fabulous. It's all good. I mean, I spent 40 years of my life doing those. This is more short-term, in-depth. And now the therapist is a little more directive and a little more focused, a little more action-oriented and future-oriented and goal-directed and solution-focused. Well, we psychoanalysts are like, well, we don't do stuff like that. I mean, we let the patient get there when and as they want to. And quite frankly, maybe they'll never will. And 2 years ago at a big conference, I had been the case discussant for a case that was a psychoanalytic case. The woman presented it proudly, but it had lasted 30 years. Wow. And the patient, quite frankly, wasn't really any better at the end of the 30 years. So then I got it, okay, Model 5. I also went to some conferences on ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And so then I sort of got it that I needed to sort of get with the program. Because there's a whole group of people out there who've been with the program, like you, for example, with your hypnotherapy, and others who sort of short-term intensive, and you get the job done. You don't, I mean.
But can I jump in and say something about my experiences being a hypnotherapist? When I started doing hypnosis, no one left my practice. My clients stayed with me long-term, more than they would have if it weren't for the hypnosis. It wasn't my intention.
Interesting. All right, that is interesting.
Okay, anyways,
All right, so I happened upon, and you never, I mean, I know how I came upon Model 4 because Larry Hedges made me, but Model 5, it just sort of a more brain-based, I came upon the concept of of therapeutic memory reconsolidation. And where the sort of analytic and scientific and neuroscientific in me, I started to devour the literature from the cognitive neuroscientists and the research that's being done in the lab. And then I started reading some David Feinstein and Bruce Ecker, they're clinicians who've been for the last 10, 15 years, is relatively new, been onto this concept, and I'll explain it in a moment, or what my understanding is of it anyway, of therapeutic memory reconsolidation. All right, but before I do that, I want to say, to sort of give it away, my Model 5 then, so whereas Model 1, classical psychoanalytic, Model 2, self-psychology and other deficit theories, Model 3, contemporary relational theory, Model 4, existential humanistic perspective, Model 5 is a quantum neuroscientific approach. I want to say first about quantum and then the neuroscientific, which is where therapeutic memory reconsolidation comes in. But I want to say the quantum first, please. And we're going to see that it's a synergy of mindfulness, which is a story about paying attention to what I call old bad, and intentionality, which is a story about intending new good. So mindfulness, which is attending to old bad in the body, stored in the body, and intentionality, which is paying attention to new good and the possibility that there could be something different. And I lifted from ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, I lifted the concept of cognitive diffusion, whereby, and acceptance, that you accept the reality that there are different ways to look at things. And then I sort of got it more about the quantum, not that I begin to understand about quantum theory or the quantum realm, but I love the concept of, and it feels intuitively right to me in my body, in my heart, in my mind. Not that those are separated, but I had to say those words.
Yeah.
All right. The idea that when you, in the quantum realm, there are infinite possibilities, invisible.
Yeah.
So you have a wave, a quantum wave, a wave of energy, and it holds infinite potential. And it's only when you observe it and set the intention, right? Mindfulness, synergy of mindfulness and intentionality, set the intention for something, a future something, that it will collapse into a visible single particle or reality. And something becomes actualized or manifest. And so for patients who have analysis paralysis, or, and now we have to have an R word for the defense. And now I get to sort of use this sort of little bit snobby word that's an MD type word, refractory. It sort of means refractory and inertia, refractory inertia. And let me highlight, I didn't realize this about inertia. So analysis paralysis, in essence, model 5, but that doesn't start with an R. So it has to be refractory inertia. And inertia means one of two things. Either you're stopped and you can't start, or you've started and you can't change direction or stop. So inertia means stuck with wherever you are or aren't. So refractory inertia. And again, my 5 models are integrated, hopefully, transitioning back and forth between them. And moment by moment, as you sit with your patient in the hour, sometimes you don your model 2 hat, your model 4 hat, your model 1 hat, depending upon what's in the spotlight in the moment. So the patient who's stuck and just stuck and they're not losing the weight, they're not this, they're not that, analysis paralysis, they understand. So the name of my 5th book here, Lifting from Soren Kierkegaard, Understanding Life Backward, models 1 to 4, but living it forward, model 5. Wow. And I figured out the subtitle, which I haven't even shared with you yet, very recently, the subtitle, which is Analyzing to Understand, models 1 to 4. But envisioning possibilities to incentivize action.
I love it.
All right. So model 5, from refractory inertia. To, I hope I remember what this one is. There's so many different A's. To action. And actualization of potential. So the wave with infinite invisible potentiality, possibilities, you observe it, you set the intention, and it collapses into a single observable particle or reality. So from analysis, paralysis, and inaction to action and actualization of potential. All right, now, what is the optimal stressor? This one just fell into my lap. And I mean, it almost makes you feel right. You know what I mean? Right. Okay. Woo, 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 woo. But anyway, but in the quantum realm, you know, anything's possible. All right. Now, the optimal stressor will be disentanglement, quantum disentanglement from the toxicity of the past, such that one going forward can cognitive diffusion, free oneself up, accepting the possibility of a different, better, preferred reality going forward, envisioning the possibility of something different and better. All right, so the optimal stressor is quantum disentanglement or decoupling. All right, now, so that's the quantum piece, quantum neuroscientific. Now let me get back to the neuroscientific piece and the cognitive neuroscientists in the laboratory, and Bruce Ecker and David Feinstein, who are really the primary ones. Mary Bowles, Bowles, does something called rapid resolution therapy, which is very much along these same lines. And some of them, a number of people, well, actually what Bruce Ecker and David Feinstein claim, and now I do too, I've become a believer, is that there are many different ways to implement, in essence, therapeutic memory reconsolidation. Again, I haven't yet explained what I mean by it. There are many different ways to do it, but the overarching unifying conceptual framework is it's therapeutic memory reconsolidation, whereby you replace an old bad, because I'm all about old bad and new good, old bad, maladaptive,
Mhm.
Dysfunctional narrative or emotional learning. I like the word narrative. Emotional learning works too, but
Yeah.
I'm going to call it narrative, or
Yeah.
storyline, but I'm going to
Yeah.
call it narrative, or mental schema,
Mhm.
whatever. You replace an old, maladaptive, distorted,
Mhm.
negative
Yeah. Yeah.
narrative that had been constructed. This
Mhm.
is a constructivist model
Yeah.
5, by the way, that had been constructed early on by the developing child, desperate to make sense of self, others, and the world, all the stuff that was going on around her, him,
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
and constructed narratives that now are outdated. They're old, they're bad, they're distorted, they're disempowering narratives that are brought forth and in the body, carried forward, and you live by them, and they inform your experience of self, others, in the world. All right. To replace those with new, good, more adaptive. So instead of defensive, more adaptive, right? Defense to adaptation, more adaptive, empowering narratives about self, others, in the world. All right. Now, therapeutic memory consolidation. If all you do is to have the patient re-experience and relive and ab-react and catharsis and release about old bad, then there's the potential danger that it gets reinforced.
Yeah.
Because Donald Hebb, as we know, talked about neurons that fire together, wire together. So repeating over and over and over again, oh, I was raped, I was this, the fire, I lost my this, I thought, and all you do, on the one hand, yes, some release, but also there's the danger that you're going to be reinforcing the old bad.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if all you do is new good, so like, hey, you can do it. It's the way some people do positive psychology.
Yeah.
Strength-based, you can do it, think of this, do this, well, that's good, but what about the old bad that's still held in the body? So that's introducing new good and set the intention for new good, whatever. Therapeutic memory reconsolidation, and this they found in the lab, so it's scientifically backed, that if you simultaneously have the patient remember, reactivate, relive, re-experience old bad, and simultaneously, and you're probably, as you are, thinking about hypnotherapy, which is what you do, and EMDR, simultaneously introduce the vision of new good. And back and forth, and I have what I call my quantum disentanglement statement, whereby I first talk about the old, have the patient, it's co-created by patient and therapist, I statements where the patient talks about the old bad in a very embodied, and you were the one, I remember you told me, Martha, you better be sure to put that word embodied in. And so I now always, and then Beatrice Beebe told me I have to put in the word procedurally organized and implicitly held. So I get that in there too. So the embodied, implicitly held, procedurally organized wisdom of the body. But anyway, so the old bad, you revisit it, relive it, and visualize it, the autonomic reactivity, the bodily sensations, everything about it, and name it and say it. It can have bad grammar. It can have anything in the first part of the sentence. And in the second part of the quantum disentanglement sentence, you are in 3 parts. You are doing 1, 2, or 3 of the following: envisioning the possibility of a different, better, preferred reality. You're setting the intention. Number 2, you are taking ownership or holding yourself accountable, taking ownership of your need to do things differently going forward, to modify how you position yourself in relation to your life. And 3, you hereby commit to acting in alignment with your vision of what you could do and be. And in in the models 1 to 4 and all the supervising I do and in my own work, I hadn't tended to do any of that.
Right.
I'm not busy talking to my patients about, well, what could you imagine, or how about taking responsibility for changing? How
Yeah.
about committing now to going on that intermittent fasting diet? I don't do that because in models 1 to 4, for the most part, and I supervise all these people and I listen to cases and so on, it's psychoanalytic, psychodynamic, and the patient takes the lead and the therapist follows for the most part. I'm being a little simplistic here, but for the most part.
Yeah.
So model 5, brain-based therapeutic memory reconsolidation. What is that really? What that means in the lab, they found that there's a very special 4 to 6 hour reconsolidation window,
Wow.
whereby if you simultaneously, old bad and new good, simultaneously experience them, and you do it repeatedly and forcibly and create a dramatic, jolting, drastic juxtaposition experience for the patient, the new good disconfirming the old bad, a prediction error. So you have the learned expectation on the one hand of old bad and the envisioned possibility of new good. And you superimpose them in essence, left, right, left, right, left, right, which of course is sort of what EMDR is doing, sort of what you do in your hypnotherapy and so on. They're over and over and over again. Then what will happen? This is where I like to kind of throw in the kind of fancy idea here of what happens at the neural synapses. The network, the complex web of network of neurons and synapses that encode the old bad memory or narrative or emotional learning. When you have a thought, there's the transmission of impulse, electrical impulse, nerve impulse, from the pre to the postsynaptic membrane. And simultaneously, the glial cells, which are neuroimmune cells in the brain, they retract.
Wow.
They shrink, thereby allowing for the transmission of the impulse across the synapse. So it's called an unlocking or a deconsolidation as the glial cells retreat.
Wow.
But then when you add the new good, you can lock within a 4 to 6 hour period, you can lock in the new good, the new good narrative of envisioned possibility.
Wow. Right.
So you're making use of these glial cells and their retraction, contraction, and expansion, contraction, expansion, ultimately by way of unlocking, relocking, unlocking, relocking, deconsolidating, reconsolidating, deprogramming, reprogramming, so that ultimately you're going to reprogram the mind and rewire the brain by way of therapeutic memory reconsolidation. If you do not just old bad over and over and over again, not just new good over and over and over again, but you juxtapose new good, envisioned intention, setting the intention for new good on top of old bad. And so it is that whereas models 1 to 4 are sort of about the complex interdependence of the past with the present, and you need to analyze to understand so you're not ever busy theoretically repeating it. Model 5 is about, so rather than, if you're not careful, your past will inform who you are in the present. Model 5 is not fatalistic or predetermined like that. It's more, you can create your own destiny. You can create your own future by having it in you to envision possibility on top of the learned expectation, and taking ownership of your need to change and committing thereby to action and doing it over and over again. Now, let me say, when and as, which happens inevitably, the patient suddenly can't, you go back to models 1 to 4, integrating back and forth, seamless integration, blah, 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 blah. And so they may envision, well, I want to sort of, lose 100 pounds, but they aren't willing to take ownership of their need to sort of change their eating habits. So then we go back to understand more about, to have a body beautiful, that have to deal with concerns about the father, but the mother's pressure, blah, 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 blah. So back and forth, the whole net result is my psychodynamic synergy paradigm. And so in this, from 20 2010 to 2020 has been my Model 5. And now 2020 to 2030, but it hasn't happened yet, is going to be my Model 6, which
my
is spiritual.
Oh, wonderful.
Spiritual.
Great. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, I've
Indeed.
gotten a lot of pressure from people, and and
It never ends.
it never ends. So that'll be spiritual.
So we have about 5 minutes.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
So if you don't mind me shifting gears.
Oh, yes, please.
Well, I just want to say how much I appreciate you. You just shared the evolution of your own life and career. And we are so lucky to have you here.
Thank you.
Very quickly, where can people find you?
Oh, good. Yeah. All right. Well, my first 3 books are available on Amazon.com.
Yeah.
And Modes of Therapeutic Action, and Working with Resistance, and a primer on working with resistance. And the next 6 books, although this last one, Understanding Life Backward but Living It Forward, will be out in a month or 2, but are available at the following website. It's Jason Aronson's website. It's an ebook, and it is free, and it's www.freepsychotherapiebooks.org, freepsychotherapiebooks.org, and then you punch in Stark and all my books come up.
Great.
And they're free PDF downloads. They're free, and I would love people to go there and
they will
check them out. Then I have a website. So my website is well, yes, I've said it. So www.synergymed.solutions.
Yeah.
And
okay, so how do you sleep?
And my email address. Should I say my email address?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So my email address is Martha Stark MD at HMS, as in Harvard Medical School, .harvard.edu.
Wonderful. I will spell it out for people, and I'll put it under your biography.
Good. And I'd love for people to be in touch with me. I sort of sit here, especially during COVID. All I do is sit at my computer. I'm wondering what it's going to be like going outside again.
That is true.
But
so I just asked you how you sleep at night, given how busy your brain is. What do you do to nourish yourself? Tell us about your life.
Interestingly, I so believe in the power of left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, that, and I have a little something, I see I don't have it on right now, but a little thing called an Oura, O-U-R-A ring, and you wear it at night, and it shows you how much REM sleep you're doing. And so I think that while I sleep, and before I go to bed, I go left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, tapping my temples alternately. I think I'm busy creating while I sleep.
Wow.
And, I what I do is I don't give myself a lot of time to sleep at night. But then when I can, I'll take a little nap in the afternoon, because I've read and I believe that that's one of the most efficient ways to be sort of productive. The hypnagogic and the hypnopompic states where you have some of your most creative thinking. And then I happen to be blessed with a life partner who is just so wonderfully supportive and so dear to me. I am very, very, very lucky and blessed.
That's wonderful. And I know 2 other things about you. One is that you love to walk, and that you love water.
Oh, love to walk and love water. Oh, and I have to mention, I'm sorry, the other one. I love dancing. West Coast swing and hustle, disco hustle, and have done dancing for years, and was even on a few little TV shows with the dancing and a movie with the dancing. Totally love dancing. Although again, almost feel I can't really claim that because I haven't been on the dance floor for 14 months. So, I'm hoping I'll still remember how to do it, but West Coast swing.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Well, Rick, this is wonderful. Thank you. I know we golly gee, we used a lot of time here.
Well,
I got so into it, and you helped me to understand that in Model 4, dread, existential dread.
So I helped you today, and it didn't take much from me, but I also claim credit for the embodiment piece of the activity of Model 5.
Yes, you do. The embodiment piece. Thank you. Thank you.
So this has been so much fun to you too, and you've been such a help to me in my professional growth and my personal growth. way more than you may realize. So I get
Oh,
to share you with everyone today.
oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Great to have you.
Derek. All
Bye-bye.
right, good. Bye-bye.